Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our evening tonight. I was thinking earlier, it's a good night to have a virtual program so that you can be at home and nobody's driving in this, and hopefully all the connections will hold. We are recording this event and it is being broadcast live on LexMedia, so if anybody did end up missing it tonight or the connection drops, you can catch it later. My name is Christine Muir. I am the Community Librarian at Cary Library. Tonight's event is a webinar-style panel discussion, which means that none of the attendees are on camera and you're all muted on entry. If you would like to ask a question of our panelists, you may do so by using the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. It will be on the bottom of your screen on a laptop and on the top of the screen on a mobile device. With that, I am going to turn this over to Christina Lynn, who coordinated this event.
Okay, hello, good evening. Thank you, Christine, for being our Zoom host tonight and also for supporting us as we were planning this event. Again, my name is Christina Lynn and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as an Asian American. So tonight I'm very proud to be here with local anti-racist educators and activists who I have a great admiration for. They've taught me so much, and I'm truly honored that they could be here tonight in service of this event, and I can't wait to learn more from them. So we're going to be addressing the issues of racism that were exposed in the movie I'm Not Racist, Am I? And I hope everyone who watched this movie was able to gain something out of the experience. I know I certainly learned more and noticed even more than I thought I would in rewatching this movie over the last couple of days. So that's been really fun for me. And I'm also really humbled to see the support from our town, affinity groups and organizations for this event. We had over 1,000 people register to see the movie, which is amazing. And I noticed even someone was from, was tuning in from Colorado and New Jersey. So it was really nice to see that people are very much interested. So now I think it's really time to hand it over. Please stay tuned through the end. We have a couple of surprise announcements to make at the end. Yeah, so Tanya DeSolfi is going to be our facilitator for the evening. Mr. Solfi is a litigation attorney, certified mediator and divorce mediator, and she's also the vice chair of the Lexington Human Rights Committee. Mr. Solfi is an instructor, trainer, and facilitator for Quabbin Mediation's Training Active Bystanders program, working with both youth and adults. With over 20 years of experience counseling individuals in private and institutional settings, Mr. Solfi is a passionate advocate for civic and human rights and youth empowerment. She deeply believes that when all sectors of our community communicate with each other and listen to one another, we find the common threads of equity, empathy, and understanding, and can begin to build a better global and local community. Mr. Solfi embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion as both a journey and a destination, and is committed to working with her community to create positive, long-lasting change. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Christina. I want to also say thank you to the library. So Christina Muir, thank you for hosting us and getting us all set. And thank you also to Director Stembridge, who has been a huge supporter. And Christina Lynn, thank you, because you have done so much to bring this film to our community and all of the programming that you have done and been involved with for over a year to bring this event to Lexington and to work through all the COVID controversy to bring it virtually to us twice. So I wanted to say thank you. And now I'm going to jump to our awesome and esteemed panelists. I'm going to start with Daniel Lozen, who is a JD and MED, and is the director of the Center for Civil Rights Remedies, CCRR, at UCLA's Civil Rights Project, where his work is focused on raising awareness and of seeking remedies to racism as reflected in disparities in special education, graduation rates, and school discipline since 1999, when the CRP was affiliated with Harvard Law School. On these and related topics, Lozen conducts law and policy research, produces descriptive reports and articles, and has published several books. Lozen has also testified before the US Congress and the United Nations. His center's most recent work includes 2 reports on the disparate impact of school discipline, including from school police. One is focused on California and was published on July 2nd in 2020. The second is national in scope and will be published in mid-August. Lozen works closely, with educators and civil rights advocates at national, state, and local levels to address many of the contributing factors to school to the prison pipeline. Before pursuing his law degree, Lozen taught in public schools in Massachusetts for 10 years and is married to Sarah, who is an educator in Cambridge Public Schools for over 25 years, and they have 2 sons who both attended Lexington Public Schools. Thank you, Dan. We're really happy to have you today. Mona Roy is a member of IAL's Indian Americans of Lexington Education Subcommittee and chair of the Town of Lexington's Human Rights Committee. She is also the board of Special Education Parent Advisory Council, Lexington's Mental Health Task Force, and works on a variety of other town and school initiatives. By profession, she's an intellectual property attorney and is a partner at Handel and Morfsky. She serves on the advisory boards for Rhythm Eternal and BASA Foundation for Underserved Children. Maybe that's BASA, and Mona, you have to correct me if it is. Mona also connects with her humanist side when playing and performing the music of Tagore, and also enjoys teaching music to children for cultural programs in her non-existent spare time. And as a mom of 2 children, including one with severe autism and a rare medical condition, she embraces the intrinsic value of all human life and the need for universal love, understanding, and acceptance. Jody Finnegan, you want to wave, Jody? Her pronouns are she, her. Jodiah Finnegan is a Lexington resident, originally from Andover, Massachusetts. She's a proud mother of 3 children and has a 14-year-old grandson. She became the ABCL, that's the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, Education Committee Chair within 2 months of moving to Lexington. She's worked with the Human Rights Committees, working groups to prepare for both the Martin Luther King Day Community Conversation on Race and Race Amity Day celebrations. Ms. Finnegan comes from a long line of civil rights activists. Her grandmother was the original secretary for the NAACP's Merrimack Valley chapter. Her father was a compatriot of Malcolm X, and her uncle, Reverend Richard Lawrence, was a good friend of Martin Luther King and of course, marched with him on numerous occasions. Ms. Finnegan is dedicated to the struggle to attain equity and to stand and fight for our civil and human rights. She believes strongly in effecting change in our systemic institutions, educational, media outlets, public policing systems, and more. She believes that if we simply put Black people back into our history where they belong and tell the truth, we could change the perceptions that drive individual bigotry. Thank you, Jody. Katie O'Hare Gibson, her pronouns are also she, her. Thank you, Katie. Katie currently lives in Lexington with her husband and 2 sons, one of whom is a 2019 LHS graduate and one who will be starting LHS in the fall. She graduated from LHS as well, and she is dedicated to work in response to the in response to the words of Lila Watson. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. Katie, an early childhood pre-K through 1st grade teacher for 25 years in Lexington and in Dorchester, and she currently serves as the assistant principal of an elementary school in Lexington. I skipped that, sorry. She's presented at a variety of conferences, including the IDEAS Conference, white privilege symposiums, and the annual scientific conference for the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society. She's led school-based equity teams in Lexington, which develop and implement professional development opportunities for teachers in the interest of creating schools that offer an educational centered on justice. She also co-created a curriculum, Dismantling Racism in Our Town, which was developed in order to give adults in Lexington the knowledge, tools, and networking opportunities they need to dismantle local systems of oppression and discrimination. She's a master's in education in the organizational management from Endicott College and Lesley College, and a BS from Boston University. She's an ideas instructor and assistant principal at Maria Hastings. Thank you so much, Katie. Johnny Cole. He, him, his are his pronouns. He is an MAT State University of New York at Cortland and a BS from Boston University, and Director of Equity and Student Supports here at the Lexington Public Schools. He is also an ideas instructor, and Johnny is proud to be a member of an interracial family built with love with his husband and their 2 adopted children. Prior to becoming an administrator, he spent more than a dozen years as a high school English teacher, working in the Boston area, first at Medford High School and later at Concord Carlisle High School. He then spent 4 years as an assistant principal at Needham High School prior to his current role in Lexington. His family's experiences have been featured with the Huffington Post and Outspoken Voices podcast, among others. His published works include He Can't Be Your Dad, The Intersection of Race, Adoption, and Gay Marriage, a chapter in the book Adoption Matters. Teacher educators share their stories and strategies for adoptive inclusive curriculum and pedagogy. Thank you so much. We're really excited to get started with our panelists, but before we begin, I want to briefly introduce you to Miss Sharon Gunda, who is in our Lexington Human Services Department, and I'm going to turn it over to her for just a second to introduce herself.
Thank you. My name is Sharon Gunda, as Tanya mentioned. My pronouns are she, her. I am from the Lexington Human Services Department. I'm a social worker. My official title is I'm the outreach coordinator, but I'm a licensed social worker. And during this discussion, I'm available for a private conversation if anyone feels like the information is too heavy and they need some support. I'm available to talk. I'm going to just share my phone number in the chat, 781-698-4851 for those watching at home on LexMedia. And my email is sgunda@lexingtonma.gov. And again, I'm here for support. If you feel like you or a loved one really need someone to talk to outside of friends and family about these either your experiences or if this is triggering for you, if you just need any support at all, we're here for you. Our services are completely free and confidential for all Lexington residents. So please, after the program, take some time to visit our website at lexingtonma.gov/human services. I look forward to talking to you if you should need my services. Thank you.
Tony, do you want to briefly say hello?
Thanks, Tanya. I appreciate the intro. I'll be around later as well to introduce myself, but I appreciate everyone letting me be a part of this conversation. And I want to reiterate, our services are completely free and confidential for all Lexington residents. My name is Anthony Siria. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my title is the Assistant Director of Youth and Family Services. So thanks again, Tanya.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate you coming on. Okay, now we got all the business out of the way. Let's jump into the good stuff. I think I'm going to start with a quick question. Everybody's seen the film now. So was there a character that you particularly identified with, one of the students that you felt for some reason really strongly connected to, or very strongly frustrated by, or for some other reason resonated with you? I will say that I struggled a little bit with some of Martha's comments when I first started watching the film, and I'm going to leave it at that and let you guys take over. So Johnny, we're going to start with you.
All right, I was going to hold back. I think everyone knows I like to talk. I'll keep it short. I think in terms of the characters, I watched it a few months ago. We had plans to to do some screenings in the schools right around the time of the school building closures that got thwarted. And then I watched it again this weekend with my kids, who are both in middle school, and my husband. And I was reminded, feeling a certain kinship with Anna, I think her name is, the Asian young woman who is adopted. I think my own experience is I grew up in California. My mom is from Indonesia. I was born in Indonesia, came to the States as a teenager. And my biological father is white, and the man who raised me, my stepfather, is white as well. And I think that because I was acculturated by a lot of white folks in my dad's side of the family, and also that I think I spent most of my adolescence figuring out my sexual identity as a gay man. I didn't really figure out my racial identity until early adulthood. I sort of saw that happening for Anna as well in the film, and that sort of awakening. And it's something that I know I've spoken with a lot of folks through my work in Lexington and beyond, particularly with Asian folks, around how we are included in that BIPOC, people of color moniker, and how sometimes we feel somewhat erased in that presence. Sort of feeling like we're not white people, and we don't have the exact same issues that a lot of Black and brown folks have. And so I found that kinship with her, I think.
Thank you. Jody, what do you think?
I was gonna say 2, but I'd have to go with Khalik, because a lot of people, if I'm discussing something I'm passionate about, they automatically assume that I'm angry. We get all that kind of stuff. So I'd have to say Khalik. I did feel a little bit about Abby, but I was never that lost. So no, not Abby.
Thank you. Katie, go ahead.
Well, I'll jump on that, because I was going to say, as I went through the movie, I jotted down I identify with that comment or that, piece. But I would say Abby is someone that I identified with, in that I remember at the end when she was talking to her father and really pushing him on why hadn't he talked to her about these kinds of things before. And I remember having that exact same thought when I was older than she is in the film. I was probably got to 25 when I started to really understand these issues. And I remember being really mad at my parents and my teachers and everybody to let me get to that age and not be aware of these things. And so that's the one that really stuck out for me, and is why I think it's so important that we're doing this. And I'm so glad so many people watched the movie and are here tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Mona, do you want to jump in?
Yes. Actually, there was not one particular character that I fully identified with. I mean, to some extent, a representation is important. So I think Farah jumped out at me, I think probably more than others, in that sense. But also, Farah also jumped out at me and my son, because she distilled it for quickly when they were talking about the N word and why we just can't use it, and why it's completely not worth it, and why it's very dangerous. She really just cut to the chase. And I really like that. I mean, that's something that I really appreciated about her. And also, she had an interesting comment where I think it was Farah who said in the movie that she learned really early that the world is designed for white people, and that you have to navigate that world very carefully.
Thank you, Mona. Dan, Mona brought up the N-word, so I'm going to change the question for you and hit you with the hard one right out of the box. So there is a difficult part in the documentary around, an hour or so in, where the N-word is discussed. And they talk about whether or not, what they saw, right? What was the one word that came into their mind? And of course, Sasha jumps out when he says "you" to Professor Moore, and I'm gonna just leave it there and let you take it away, Dan. You gotta unmute, Dan.
It's very powerful to hear the voices of kids grapple with these issues. So that to me was, very important to hear the different perspectives on the use of the N-word, but also the thing that I am most concerned about in terms of rap music is that it can be, for white people hearing that over and over and over, what does that do to their impressions and their sense of the use of that term, especially if they don't know the history behind it. If they don't know about slavery and Jim Crow and everything that's followed, and if they don't realize the power of that word, it can be a real sort of a dangerous path to go in those discussions. But I think it also brought out the importance of having those discussions. Now, I've had discussions like that with students, both law students, my own kids, and what are the rules around it. And one in particular, I think I mentioned with you, is a representative in Congress, Antonio Delgado, who was a law student, finished Harvard Law School, went and became a rapper, or, for a few years he struggled. He was a struggling rapper, and now he moved back to New York, and they used the fact that he used the N-word. This was, talk about flipping the script. They used the fact that he used the N-word as a rapper, as an African-American and also Latinx rapper. The white Republicans tried to use that against him. It wasn't successful, and we had many conversations. But I think that it's important, the importance of language and how we use and who uses it and what context it, that was the most important piece of that.
Thank you. I agree. I think it was really interesting to hear the difference between the kids that thought it was okay to use it and came around to realizing that maybe they shouldn't. And some of the kids, like Khalik, was really good about explaining, I would never use it against somebody, right? There's a difference between whether it's used in his usage and how he was acceptable to him and how it's not acceptable to him. But that brings me back to what Mona said, which was she mentioned Farah, and Farah says, you learn not to mess with white people. That's her exact quote. You learn not to mess with white people. That's how it is. And this was all in the conversation when there were a group of kids that were in a home, in someone's home, because one of the kids, and I can't remember who it was who missed it. I think it was Aduni, had missed the N-word conversation. So they were filling her in someone's home with parents. And that's what she said. And Terrence said, we're so used to holding our tongues as well. Jody.
Sorry. I want to address two things. One, when the N-word was brought up, I'm going back for 1 second. When the N-word was brought up, you have to remember he was talking to Dr. Eddie, whatever his name is. He wasn't just a professor, he's a doctor. And that has happened. It happened with Skip Gates.
Yep.
It's happened with Oprah Winfrey. It happens with lots of NBA players. You can have all the money in the world. When you get stopped and they don't know exactly who you are, that money's not going to help you. All they see is the color of your skin. That's a very important thing to remember. And you can't wear your suit 24/7. The other thing we were talking about was Farah. And when she says that, she's 100% correct. She's 100% correct. And that's why I think Mona likes her so much, is because she shot straight from her hip and named it for what it was, and that's important. That's important for people to remember.
Thank you. Johnny.
I just want to jump in on the conversation around the N-word. I think this comes up a lot, especially in the Lexington public schools, around teaching books that have the word in it or other media. The reality is that our kids are going to encounter the word in some form, right? I think particularly in their media, and some of our kids are going to unfortunately encounter it as a victim of racial epithets that are hurled at them. One of my few criticisms of this film is how how liberally they use the word in that scene, particularly with younger students, high school, middle school students watching the film. And I want to make sure that, from my perspective, when we're in the schools, I would be very concerned if a teacher was using the word that many times in a conversation about the word, particularly if it was a teacher who did not identify as Black or African American. There's so much nuance to it, right? I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates has a great video online. It talks about how not all words are for all people, and that's a really key component of it. I think that how can we educate our kids about, and I think we see this through several of the teenagers in film. How do we educate them that they're going to encounter this in their media, and it doesn't mean that you have license to use it, and it may mean that some people, particularly African Americans or people who identify as Black, may use it in certain areas of their life. It doesn't mean that everyone can. I equate it. It's obviously not nearly the same thing, but they're going to encounter curse words and stuff in their media as well, and they have to figure out when it's okay to use those words and when it's not. I think with a word with the history and the power that this word holds, I would just caution us to when we engage in conversations, particularly with our young people, about I would caution us to talk at all about when it's okay to use it. It's a challenge, I think.
I would say it's not okay to use it at all. Now, my son's a rapper, and I can't lie, he uses it.
Yeah.
But I don't ever tell him that it's okay to use it. And the reason I don't tell him that it's okay to use it is because it's not okay to use it. Okay. Now this is wrong, but truly this is the truth, right? If I was walking around making songs and decided to put in the mainstream media songs and use the Jewish K word all through the song, everybody in society would tell them to take that off the radio. Except it's part of the systemic thing to keep you down. So they leave it there on purpose so that you do hear it at least 1,000 times a day. I'm done.
Thanks, Jody. I just wanted to remind everybody, I'm not sure if we went through this earlier, but we will try to take questions. If you put questions in the question and answer chat that's at your bottom, we're going to try to get to those at the end. We're going to do a little bit more panel time, but then we will try to get to your questions. So if you want to type a question into the Q&A, we will get to those. Christine is going to monitor those with me in a little while, and we'll get to that. But going back to the N-word and what people were saying, I had a thought, and I think I went out of my head. I'm going to move on because I can't remember. Abby and Anna had a little chat at their house, at Anna's house together when she moved back out to Queens, and they were hanging out on the porch, and they were talking about how everybody was feeling and if people were being honest with each other in the room. And Abby tells Anna that Anna should say more and she should speak up more. And then we come into the group in the room where everybody was talking, and Terrence addresses Martha and says that he was upset with her 90% of the time, and her choice of a slur that I will call a slur of what she chooses to use to describe mixed kids. And there's a conversation about that in the room. And I just want to know what you as the panel think about that interaction and how it could have been handled. If I noticed that the facilitator, she said that it was everybody's job in the room to have called out Martha before then. And so I'd really like some feedback, because one of the things that we were talking about before we all got on the panel was that perhaps there was no modeling, really strong modeling for, I made a mistake and I'm sorry and thank you for letting me know, because that's something I shouldn't have done. I think we kind of get there with Martha, but it wasn't quite that clear. And I'm not sure, there was some discussion about the fact that she she never apologizes to Terrence. She actually doesn't say she's sorry. She just continually says, but I was hurt too. So who has some feedback on that conversation in the room? Or, yep, Dan, go ahead.
So one of the takeaways was that there also probably needed to be more of a structure around how the students talk to each other personally, because, and I was watching this, both my kids were watching it, and we took that as Terrence insulting her because this 90%, he was really saying, I don't like you. You're, most of what, like 90%, that's a big number. So that, I think, got mixed up with her feelings that, and she should have, apologized about, using an offensive term and sort of being maybe flip about it, or just thinking it was just okay and I think she was called out on on it a bit before then. So it wasn't like no one called her out on it. So it was an interesting thing about the group dynamics, because I don't know how they've been working on this for a year. They're working together as a group for a year, but I thought there might, part of her feeling hurt wasn't just about the racial dynamics, but also, if anyone told me that 90% of what I said, that's not just the use of that term. That's like most of what I'm saying is, I forgot what he said, but it was like, useless or annoying or something like that. So that was my takeaway, that there was more interpersonal, a need for greater interpersonal sort of supports than maybe took place, that might have gotten mixed in with the whole, made it harder. But eventually she did come around and at least recognize it was wrong.
Yeah. Well, she does certainly at the end. Jody.
Yeah, I have to kind of disagree. I think when she called people halfies, everybody kind of laughed. They didn't really call her out on it when they should have. And she did say a lot of really messed up stuff. She said she wanted to be Black, not realizing what that really, really means. Yeah. Even Jane Elliott asked people, you want to be Black? Everybody says no. I mean, she says, the thing about happy, she says a lot of really kind of just messed up stuff.
She said she coined the term.
Yeah. And wanted to back it up 100%. But she also felt like she came from the hood, right? So I'm dating a Black man, and I know what it's about, and I know everything. And she was the one who knew the least in the room. Mm. So I can understand. She hurt a lot of people's feelings. And what she was saying was straight ignorant. And she didn't realize it. But she needed to be, I mean, she's a child too, yes.
Yes.
Right. But she needed to be, redirected. Like the lady said, the other counselor later said, if you let it get to this point and you didn't address it, that it was that much and you didn't address it, you should have. But I noticed too, Terrence, every time something was said that was uncomfortable, Terrence laughed. He was not a person to be outspoken to address it like that.
Yeah.
And I heard Khalik too, when you said you don't always want to be the person who's like, hey, that's wrong. Hey, because then you just become the angry Black person all the time, trying to defend yourself.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that goes back to Anna and Abby, where she says, we're the majority. The non-white students are the majority, and yet they're the ones who all feel like they're the ones who have to hold their tongues. That was the conversation that they were having. Mona, you have something to say.
I just wanted to add, just from sort of a different perspective, which is not that it disagrees with anybody's perspective, but firstly, she's a kid. So I'm going to start off by saying that, that's the good news is they're all kids who are in this program. And I know they grew. And I think, we want to sort of, we all said stupid things as kids. Having said that, I think one of the interesting dynamics, why, this is just my own theory, but I think I'm right on this. Why people of color don't speak up? Because they are so conditioned that if you say the smallest criticism of a white person, and then it becomes, there they go again. There they go complaining. Why do you have to be like that? And so all of these kids, I wanted to, I really respect Dr. Liza, I can't remember her last name, but it is true that it is on all of us when we don't call out people. But you know why he called her out finally? Because he felt safe to do so. He was in a room full of a non-white majority room where he felt like he could finally say it. Can you imagine if he did that in real life right here in Lexington? I mean, what would the reaction be? I just, and I feel for when Jody said that, my heart broke, because I'm thinking, why should Jody have to be the one to say it? We should all be up there. It shouldn't be up to Jody to call stuff out. It's all of our responsibility. But Tanya, there's a price to pay for that, as that's the truth.
There is a price to pay, absolutely. And the white teacher in that room with all the white kids said it shouldn't be on all the non-white kids to be the ones who are stepping up and calling people out and telling people that it's not okay. Both Jody, I'm going to go Jody and then Johnny. And then I have another, and then Katie.
Okay, I just needed to say that Martha got upset and made it all about her when that happened. And if unchecked, a Martha will turn into today's Karen. Okay. But no, I'm dead serious. And it's just as deadly as everybody else. Look at Rosewood. Okay?
Amy
Cooper, I'm talking Rosewood. They killed a whole town behind a woman who decided to cry, So, I mean, Emmett Till was dead behind some mess like that. You got to be serious. White woman's tears are killing people sometimes. And they turn it on, and she made it all about her. And you need to listen to how you hurt my feelings. And I don't think she really paid attention to how she hurt Terrence's feelings or everybody else's in that room's feelings.
I hope she did, but I don't know.
Maybe later in her growth, because it seemed like that by the end of the movie, she seemed to reflect back and was like, it was tough, but I grew.
Did her boyfriend use the term at the very end there?
That wasn't her boyfriend. That was that was the mixologist who was doing the music for them, and he used a very close term. He said "halvesies," but she was the first one to say, "Don't do that." At that point, Johnny, you had a comment, and then Katie. Then I have another question because we're going to get to the definition.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that in a lot of the work that we do in Lexington of the schools that I do through the Ideas program with Katie, we talk a lot about both and thinking, right? Like two things can be true at the same time. I think that it's everything we're saying about Martha, and it's hard to talk about her as a character. She's a real person, right? This is a documentary. All those things are true. That when she started crying, many people in our community read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo last fall, and she's got a whole chapter on this, right? White woman's tears, and how it just shifts the focus to that person and their hurt. And that is true. And at the same time, it wasn't. I don't think that most people who do that, it's like not a conscious manipulation, right? And what needs to happen though is they have to come to that understanding of that the hurt you feel in that moment when those blinders were ripped off you as a person in the dominant identity, that it pales in comparison to the daily microaggressions and harm and hurt caused to people in subordinate identities, like people of color in this country. And we need to ask, what's more upsetting, that you were called out for this, regardless of how you were called out, right? Whether it was mean or nice or whatever, is that more upsetting the way you were called out, or was it that you were hurting people? And I think that there's also this piece, since we're also engaging as a community in trying to dismantle these systems of oppression like racism. There's also the piece to think about what is our role when we do engage in these conversations. So I know, I suffer many microaggressions as a person of color, as a gay man, probably as a Californian. But the issue is that my role in the public schools, for example, the director of equity and student supports, is to facilitate that learning for folks. And so sometimes in my professional role, I have to do things that I wouldn't do in my personal life. If I was in the supermarket, someone said something, or even one of my friends said something to me. And I think that when we're coming together as a community, that's something that we have to think about and really care about, is that absolutely, he had every right to say what he said the way he said it. And when we come together as a community, it's also thinking about, what's what is the goal here? If the goal is simply like she needs to learn and I don't care, what goes on with her, that's okay. If that's a perspective. If the goal is like we're in a classroom together and we're in a learning community together and I want to make things better, hopefully we can create some partnerships. Again, I'm not trying to suggest that the people of color and others forward in identity should carry the burden of this work. I just think that there's slightly different contexts with which we all operate. That's an important facet of the work. And the last thing I was going to say, just to transition over to Katie, is she is a white woman and has probably shed some tears over the years. And I've heard her tell her story many times about how coming to terms with her identity as a white woman. And I was going to tee her off for that, or not. I don't know the sports analogy. Pitch it over to her. So go for it.
Wasn't planning on getting into my racial identity, but I guess, what I was going to say is one thing I was going to say, I just want to echo, I think it was Mona who said that they had gotten to this point when they could say this stuff honestly. And sorry if I'm misattributing that. But I do think that's important, that there were a lot of things unsaid because they didn't have the safety. They didn't know each other at the beginning. So, you're not going to put yourself out there and say that at the beginning. Although I would caution us as adults to do whatever you need to do for yourself, by yourself or with your trusted friends, to get yourself there. Because once you can get yourself there as a person, you often can do it and figure out how to do it well in a group, even if it's people that you don't know. Or I'm speaking as someone, a white person and a white woman who I think our society is very set up to protect white women. And I think Martha, that's why she was so, knew the least, as someone said. I think Jody, she had been so protected. And when you watch how her parents talked to her, when she talks about that word she used and how inappropriate it was, her father responded like he was surprised to hear that too. When she talked to her mother about some of the things, the mother kind of backed up her uneducated point of view and was kind of pulling her back. And so that's not in any way to defend her, but I just really saw how that's playing out. And I will say, I guess, to my racial identity, Johnny, that that was familiar to me. Having white family members say things about, bigotry and making me feel like, oh yeah, see, anyone can be racist. And when really it's very different when there's someone who's, like I said, very protected by the society, and then has someone say something that might hurt your feelings. That's very different than someone saying things or doing things that put you in danger. So I guess I also am just saying this to put an appeal out too, that this is why it's so important for us to talk about this. I think white families in general don't talk about race with their families and with their children. And it's very evident to me in watching this movie and in my life that children of color are much better prepared to talk about this. Guess why? Because their families talk about it, and white kids don't talk about it, and they don't have the language and don't know how. So I just want to, I guess I'm plugging that, but also just, saying that was very familiar to me as well.
That was awesome, Katie, especially because you just did the segue with bigotry and the definition of racism. So I know this is a hot button for a lot of people, and I know we can get into additional books and theories on the definition of racism, but they use the definition of power, and of course that's systemic power, and they very distinctly separate it from individual meanness. So I think we should talk a little bit about that. And I also want to say that I think one of the really important things is everybody is in a different place on this spectrum. It's a spectrum. It's like so many other things. Some people are over here, some people are all the way over here, and there's plenty in the middle and all along the spectrum for where you're at with having these conversations and discussing these things in comfortableness. And like Katie said, it's great if you can get to the place of understanding with your friends, close friends, family, people who can help you move to that space. But back to the bigotry and racism definition, who wants to take up the definition and why it is or isn't accurate, and why there is a significant difference between bigotry and individual meanness and actually racism? I'm going to pick on somebody. Go ahead, Johnny.
So a lot of the professional learning we do with staff and the school, and I know a lot of teachers have taken this up with their students, is looking at this definition. And I know that there are other works out there that use different versions of what racism is, and I think it's mainly semantics. And I think what we look at is the way I explain it is that everybody is aware of stereotypes, right? And I would caution us to think that that all stereotypes are bad. There's no such thing as a positive stereotype, because they condition us to think about an entire group of people as one thing, or one aspect of them. And then those stereotypes influence our thinking, and we have biases as a result of that thinking, that then result in prejudices, that then result in actions. We take prejudicial actions, right? So we and science tells us that happens unconsciously, with how likely we are to smile at someone or across the street when someone's walking towards us. And then even conscious decisions, like when we're looking at resumes and deciding who to call in for interviews. And so that when it becomes action, then we're discriminating, right? We're treating someone different based on an identity group. We're all capable of all of those things. What I appreciate about this definition of racism is that it is about systemic power. It's about who collectively has the power to write the rules and decide who's on the inside and who's on the outside. A really great example that we do in the Ideas program that we use a lot with a lot of LPS staff, Katie and I have had the pleasure of facilitating conversations with. We talk about left-handedness and right-handedness, right? Like that most things in the world are made for right-handed folks. Can openers and even measuring tapes, when you pull a measuring tape out, it's made so that the numbers are upside down if you're left-handed. The desks in our classes. And we understand why that is, right? Like right-handed folks are the majority and they get to decide how the manufacturers set up their equipment and everything. And the left-handed folks have to live in that world. The same is true for all aspects of identity, right? And it's not always a numbers game. And often history has an impact. And so even though we may have individuals who have significant power, we've had a Black president, we have many congresspeople of color, and it doesn't mean that collectively we have a lot of power. Eddie Moore says in the film when they are talking about the N-word, and I think it's Martha says, well, I don't think of you when I think of that word because you're dressed the way you are. You're wearing a suit. And he makes the comment about, well, I don't wear this suit 100% of the time, right? When I go to the gym, when I do whatever. That was a conversation I had with my young son who appears to the world as a young Black boy with kinky hair, and he loves to wear hoodies, and he loves to go down to the 7-Eleven up the street and buy candy. And we had a conversation about Trayvon Martin and about how it doesn't matter, what kind of grades he gets or all the books he's reading at home. When he's walking down the street, it just takes one person to look at him and see the really negative things that we attribute to young brown and Black boys, for it to be a life and death situation. And so even though there are definitely people who look like him or like he will when he's not 12, who have individual power, it is that systemic power. And then the piece that a lot of people come back to around well, what about people who say racist things who are people of color? The way we talk about that in the learning that I do with folks is that is often an internalized form of racism, and a collusion within the system, because it's all about who's benefiting, right? When different groups of people of color start attacking each other, they're not the ones benefiting. The white folks are still the ones benefiting. The system is set up to benefit them. And so that's why we talk about, that people of color in the system can't be racist. They can discriminate, they can have biases, they can have prejudices, but they can't be racist through that position. And because white people always benefit, no matter what, they are inherently, there's a racist piece at that, right? Like when you go to apply for an apartment, you're trying to rent an apartment, and the person who's renting the apartment is racist in the traditional sense, doesn't want Black people living in his apartment, and you get the apartment because you're white, you benefited from that system that exists out in the world.
Dan.
Yeah, so if I could respond. So all of the work I do as a civil rights advocate is, I would say, or 99% is addressing systemic racism and power imbalance. So I totally agree. In fact, the thing I was most disappointed about this, I was thinking, well, what does this say about systemic racism in Lexington? Where, when I did the MLK Day conversation on race, I pointed out that a very, very low percentage, and I just checked the numbers, a very low percentage of Black students are in advanced courses. and it's incredibly low. It's, beyond the pale, and it's persisted. So I pointed it out 2 years ago. Lexington was supposed to do something about it. So I was hoping, and this sort of goes to where these kids, winding up, what are the actions that are going to happen from this? What are the actions that, the white kids are going to take on? What are the actions that we can all take on? But I don't want to be the white male saying I disagree with the concept of racism black people can't be racist or engaged in racism, because there are a lot of leading civil rights lawyers. One of my mentors, John Powell, for example, would say he disagrees with that. And I don't know if I would go as far as Ibram X. Kendi, but he did write this book just very recently, and he would say it's racist to say that black folks or any group can't be racist because of you're overestimating white power and you're underestimating the potential of black power. It's not saying the context is, we know what the context is and the power imbalance that exists and how strong that is, but and Powell talks more about the engaging in dehumanization and otherism is really at the heart of it, and the need for us all to share in responsibility as humans to embrace that and to all sort of figure out what we can do. So the idea that, let's say Justice Clarence Thomas, who's made many decisions that I would call racist, that have incredible impact on the rest of us, on our whole society, and it's a structural impact. It's not just about personal stuff. He is in a very important position of power, and he's not the only one. So, but I don't want to get caught up in that, because I think what we don't want to lose in this discussion is the need to address structural racism and the power imbalance and the need to actually take action. And what are we doing about it? And think about what are we doing about it in Lexington? Why is it that, for example, we don't see more people of color living in Lexington? And then we wonder why we have these stereotypes. The other thing is that, white racists grow up in this isolation. So even though Kendi he separates the elite racists from those people who are affected by it, who engage in hatred and intolerance, but aren't the ones sort of manipulating racism to their benefit. He draws a distinction, but people grow up, I don't think people are born racist. So they have to learn that in isolation. And I think that's an important part of the problem, and one that we really have in Lexington. And think about the diversity in terms of the faculty, but also you see it in the data, who's taking AP classes, who's in advanced coursework, who's disciplined. 10% of the black students at the high school were suspended, whereas it was 3% of white kids or less than that. So there's these huge disparities that impact educational outcomes, and they also affect kids and how they feel about themselves and whether they feel like they're an other or not. And so there are things that we can take action on right here in Lexington. So, that's...
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's huge. And I think that the more community members that push and ask for that, the more response that we're going to get. Jody, you had a hand up.
Yes. Actually, Dan, you did your thing MLK Day, and I moved in the end of February or whatever. And that's actually how I ended up the ABCL's education chair, is because I was so angry. And coming from Andover Public Schools, I was an old 766 kid. I don't know if anybody remembers what that program was. It was a long time ago. But it's a small room, where they tell you that you're not very smart. Well, I graduated after dropping out of school at 14 years old because I thought it was stupid. I graduated summa cum laude from Northeastern University. My GED tests were off the chain. I didn't have to take an SAT test or nothing. They were like, you want to go to school? Yeah, you can come to school. So they told me I was dumb for years. They did it to my children. My son had to go to court for 2 years for drawing. They put a chins on him for drawing, because if the teachers got mad, he would just put his head down and start to draw. He didn't cuss anybody out. He didn't call anybody names. He didn't hit anybody, and he wasn't late to school. And they did it to my grandson too. So I know how they set us up. I know, just like they did Khalik when he had the marker, and they gave him the ticket for a marker. Yeah, they can turn all kinds of things against you and make you pay for it and put you, I used to call the school the jail rail, way before you came out with your report. My father used to call it.
I don't claim to have coined the phrase, but yeah.
My father came up with that years ago.
There you go.
And it's an obvious system. And if you're living it, you notice that things happen to you like that. And to overcome them is really hard. And, I grew up with friends that I thought were like my brothers, and they live in Florida. And I've known them all my life, been to their weddings and everything. And recently, when this Black Lives Matter stuff started happening, I found out they were really racist.
Yeah.
Like, they were really racist. They like me.
Right.
They don't like Black people.
Mm.
They don't like Black people at all. And it hurt me, but I had to, I had to realize that there are people out there like that, and that racism is serious and real. I tell people all the time, when I moved here, my son had friends of all different races and all different races. We come from Malden, or he comes from Malden. And he moved here, and he was like, I'm starting not to like white people, because now I feel funny. People hate you for the color of your skin and really can hate you like that. And I'm like, yeah, he never felt that before.
We're lucky to have you, Jody. Thank you. We're glad you're here. Mona, you have something to say.
Yes. Firstly, I did want to say, because I had seen Dan's wonderful presentation, I did want to acknowledge that this, Johnny and I know Katie and many others at Lexington Public Schools, it's really hard to undo. It's 400 years of racism in this country. So it's very, very hard to do. I think I was identified as the chair of the Human Rights Committee. So I will, of course, continue to ask hard questions. But I do want to acknowledge that LPS does recognize the systemic inequities. And the reason we push so hard, I think, is because our kids are being harmed in real time. It's not that they're not trying. I know they're trying. This is all Johnny talks about all day long. But the truth is that not only is this harming Jody's kids, but I think about particularly, again, looking at sort of the Asian demographic, and again, we're not a monolith, but what lessons are we teaching our own kids? Are we teaching our own kids here that, we have to try to be white adjacent so that we're power adjacent, so that we get that seat at the table, not the good seat at the table, the crappy one that's in the corner where you have the short chair, but at least, or is that what we're teaching them, and do we do that by snatching away? Is it so that we shut the door so that other people can't get a seat at the table? I hope that we're coming to a place in this town where people across all races realize that it would be more productive. Let me speak in Lexington terms. It would be economically beneficial. It would be economically beneficial for all of our kids to do very well and succeed, not just some demographic, but all demographics. And particularly, I worry, and I will say this, I guess on TV, I will say that I'm concerned that we send some of our Asian kids the wrong messages. We send them both the idea that in order to be successful, they have to go along and get along. And we send them the other message that Black people deserve this. When they go to their AP classes and don't see a Black person, it starts early. I mean, I'm not going to rehash all that. That's for another HRC meeting. But when we see that early, what kind of subliminal messages are we sending that demographic? We're both sending them the message not to be friends with Black people, and we're sending them the message that just remember, you're good. You're not number one, but you're okay. I mean, we'll let you at the table. Remember though, the bad chair, not the good chair. So I think that's very important to recognize that our whole community really needs to I like the term. I appreciate Katie's she's very modest. She's doing an incredible job with dismantling racism as a resident. I know she's been identified at school, but she's as a resident, she's doing an incredible job. And I hope that there will be points where all demographics can really work together to dismantle racism, because we're hurting each other. We're just, I mean, it's foolish when, our kids are going to look stupid for this 21st century is here. It's 2020. We should be ready for a 21st century global economy. We shouldn't look like what they think of us on TV, the stereotype of Americans. At least from Lexington, we can do better. I can't fix the rest of America, but Lexington, I think we can do better.
Yeah.
With just a quick comment. Just because one of the goals I know we talked about for when we were planning this session was to model how to have a conversation about this really challenging stuff and perhaps disagree on some points. I just wanted to point out two things that I think came up that are helpful in modeling my thinking, and how conditioned we are to think a certain way about race and racism in this country. Dan mentioned asking why don't more people of color live in Lexington? And I want us to think about that question and what are we actually asking that question? Because we have a lot of Asian folks that live in this town. I think we're actually almost in the public schools, we're more than 50% students of color. And so I think when we ask that question, I'm assuming what you meant by that question is more Black and brown folks live in this town, right? And that language is so important so that we're asking the exact questions we want, and we're not erasing the experiences of certain folks. And similarly, when we talk about, Mona mentioned 400 years of racism in this country, for Africans that were kidnapped and forced to work in the Americas in captivity, that is absolutely true. And for Indigenous folks, it's almost 600 years of racism, right? And so we have to think about how do we create a truly inclusive perspective on this, because otherwise we're constantly just, as she mentioned, as Mona mentioned, sort of fighting for the table scraps. And so just wanted to share that.
And I think it's important to think globally, because racism is about power globally and who controls it, but it also, will lead to our own destruction as humanity.
Yeah.
When you think about racism and environmental issues, why is it that people think we can pollute the way we do and destroy rainforests and do the various things we do in small segments, get all these benefits, other people are suffering, and it's going to get a lot worse. It's going to get a lot worse unless we come together around these issues.
You guys have reminded me of a couple things. One is they start the entire movie off by saying there's an entire generation at risk. They said at risk. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about an entire generation and group of kids that are struggling. And then the other thing that everyone brought up, which is another one of my questions that I wanted to get to, was when they played the game, the dream game, right? Terrence is an Asian man, I believe, in the dream game. And he says, one of the quotes that he says as he's playing the game is, my character didn't go anywhere. I just inched forward very, very slowly, but basically almost nothing pertained to me, which I thought was a really powerful statement. And which ties also into Anna's statement about how she considered herself white for a long time, which again, Johnny, goes into her being adopted by a white family and being raised in a 99.9% white community, which she looked up, right? Because and how much more she felt, how more comfortable she felt when she was in Brooklyn Heights because of the hurricane. So I just wanted to bring back that part. And I know, Jody, you had something to say. And I'm not gonna take that away from you. So if you can remember it, if I didn't step on it for you.
My quick thing to say was off of Mona talking about how the other races also need to remember the kind of remember that they're marginalized too. And in the movie, I noticed Sasha was talking about how all of his friends look alike and all of his friends are white, but he had an Asian friend sitting right there. All of his friends were not white, but I guess this Asian kid must have assimilated so much Sasha didn't notice. So, but it's, you have to be careful for that, because if you don't remember in history, it's all good until, like when Japan had a problem after World War II, and they turned everybody into internment camps that was Japanese. So, you know, it's all good, but you're not a white man either. And I wanted to quickly remember, and I was saying when I watched the movie Sasha, you're not a white man either. You know, they didn't say who was white, but the Aryan nation ain't taking Sasha. He's Jewish.
Well, that was in the definition, wasn't it? Right? When he said, we don't define what white is, we just tell you who isn't.
But a lot of those people didn't realize they weren't.
Yeah.
You know, when we watched the privilege walk and Abby walked to the front like she was a white girl, I mean, that's not real life, but she don't know, you know.
Katie, you had something, and then I'm going to try to get to questions, I think. I think we're about at that time.
All right, I just want to build on what you were saying, Jody, because for those in the back, right, what does that say that Sasha didn't recognize? And I'm thinking about the story that you told, Jody, about your friends, how you didn't know they were racist because they liked you. And so I think that sometimes what people do is when they know someone, they accept them as an exception. And this whole colorblindness thing that we have in our culture, that we think that that's a good thing, right? Oh, I don't even see you as whatever your identity is, right? And how horrible that is, because what that means is, oh, you're normal, you're like me. And so you still other a whole group of people, and you personally develop relationships with people who belong to these groups that are different than you, and you just erase that. And it allows people to continue to other and just so think, oh, well, but you're not one of them, which actually further ensconces those racist ideas and those issues. So I just had to say that really loud to make sure people heard that and thought about that and recognize, you know, when that's happening and catch ourselves so that we don't continue that.
That's the reason why I'd like to have it taught, the Human Genome Project, so that we all know that we're all one race, and really that racism is just debunked.
Right.
You didn't even have racism until 1450 something when we decided colorism was a thing. Before that, there was no racism. There wasn't no racism.
Along the same lines too, when, you know, especially for white folks who are confronting their own racism, it isn't, you don't essentialize yourself. It's not who you are. You are also part of the context of history. You breathe in, you know, with regard to implicit bias. There is a toxicity in the environment that you are part of, that it's hard to separate yourself from it, but it's important also to know that you don't have to be that. You don't, you know, and people change, and these conversations are important, and to think about the potential of all of us to change and to grow and to improve. I think that's really important.
I'm going to actually ask you to continue that thought, Dan, because I just saw a note from someone who asked, are all white people racist even when we're doing the work? Are we still deemed racist once we're trying to do the work?
Yeah, I have a different sort of sense, because as a civil rights advocate, often, I think I even said at MLK Day, that I took the implicit bias test and came out, and it was slightly negative against Black people. And that's a hard thing to say publicly, but that is true. It's also contextual. So I think people have to understand, and this is something that actually Ibram X. Kendi also points out, that you can act in a way that's racist in one environment and not in another. And that it changes. And hopefully, you know, through your education and your growth and your awareness and your efforts and taking action, you're not just, you know, when we change structural racism, we are changing that environment. We are reducing the toxicity of what we experience and what our children and children's children experience. So it's a process, but it's not a static thing. Oh, I took a test, I'm racist, you know, end of the story. I'm now going to just stay an angry white man because nothing else.
I was stamped. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's complex. We're all complex human beings. Every single one of us. It doesn't matter what you look like, what background you're from. We're all complex human beings. And because it's our nature to put others in a box so that we can sort and organize because that's human nature, we sometimes forget that all people are complex. And as Johnny said before, he was going on the both and, it's also the good bad binary. There is no good bad binary. We are all sometimes good, sometimes bad. We all make bad choices and do bad things or unkind things, just like we all make really good choices and do really kind and good things. I'm going to try here to jump over to some questions really quick. This goes all the way back to Martha, and any thoughts on something Martha said about how it relates actually to Lexington in wanting to be Black sometimes. Is it about being friends or being something else? Does someone want to tackle that? Do you think Martha wanted to be Black because of her environment, because it was friendship? I personally think she was trying to fit into her environment. That was my perspective. Anyone on the panel can obviously disagree.
Hood. She lives from Harlem. So
she had made a pretty significant change from Upper West Side to Harlem, Morningside Heights.
And you've got to remember too, she also felt oppressed because she was the only white person in her neighborhood. So she didn't feel like she had that white privilege everybody was talking about. She's like, I don't feel like I have that. I feel like they have more power over me because I'm a minority. And I noticed somebody, Salome, my girl Salome, said something in the chat about we're in the world we're the majority. If we all came together, we're the majority, but we're considered the minority because of the amount of power we have, right? So she might be the only one white person in the town, or in that area. But like she said, when she moved into that area, everybody asked her if they were buying the building.
Right. I think what's complicated too is that when you are a member of a dominant group in one aspect of your identity and a subordinate in another, right? So she's a member of the white racial group in power, and she's also a member of people in poverty, which is not the folks in power. And so it's that intersectionality that then plays tricks on your mind, and particularly the adolescent mind. I was a high school teacher for many, many years, and I got so sick of hearing from many white kids about like what a benefit it is to be Black applying for college. Because they have these very simplistic ideas about affirmative action and quotas and whatnot that are not actually based in reality. And when you look at the sort of systemic stuff, the data that Dan was talking about, you wouldn't choose to be Black when applying for college because the odds would be stacked against you. And so I think that when you are promised certain things, and I think our society promises a lot to white folks. I think that American society in particular, it makes certain promises that perpetuate the system. And then when you don't get that, when you're living in poverty, for example, or you have some other subordinate identity that plays out in your life, you want to grasp at something else to make it better. And I think that's a little bit of what's happening with Martha. My theory. All my years as a psychologist, I guess, coming out here.
We have a question that asks, what's one thing white people can do to be better, to better support people of color? Mona, if you're talking,
I mean, there's not one particular thing that it just, people have, I think people have to, and I think our town, I'll take sort of the mantle of, from the town, I think we have to give people more opportunity to understand how we got here in the first place. I think, just saying that I absolutely understand what the film said, but I think sort of in Lexington, when I'm looking at, my own town here, what can people do? And I think the first thing that there's three things people could do. One is educate yourself on the real history. It's not even hard. There's a YouTube video of John Oliver just from Sunday. I mean, it's not the whole history, but it gives you a start, right? It's not. And then the second thing is when people of color tell you their experiences, for God's sakes, believe them. That is, they didn't want to tell you in the first place. They really didn't want to. But if they do tell you, listen. I mean, Jody's been very gracious to maybe because she feels comfortable in this group, but to share. But when people, and I would say that to, I think that's very important. And the other thing is, I don't want to take up this thing. I think the third thing I would say definitely is when you see disparities, Dan pointed out a lot of disparities. And, I don't want to just pick on the schools. There's plenty of disparities outside of the schools in this town too. And I think that when we see those disparities, your first response shouldn't be, well, it's not my fault they're that way. Wrong response. Really take a moment to think about how we got here and what can we do to make it better for all of us.
I would say that, but I would also say there are some things that once your eyes are open, you need to be paying attention to, right? Like the discipline disparity. That's something that people really need to pay attention to. And those numbers need to come down, no questions asked. They need to pay attention to that there's a reason why we couldn't get a Black survey in Lexington, and that it had to be done by an outside person to do it so that you could actually hear how badly Black kids are treated in the school systems here. But I already knew this, but they did not want you to even know. It was not going to be done. I asked for, 2 years, a little over 2 years for this, and it was not going to be done. So if the kid from Rutgers didn't get this thing done, it wouldn't have been done. And I hope they disagree with it so that we can get it really done and actually have names of the people who are actually doing this to our children, because they know who they are. And you're not going to change the culture of the school until you get rid of them. I'm sorry. And you have to stand behind some of the stuff that you see. Like, they need to be hiring more people. Do you realize every school is named after a slaveholder? Do you realize the only Black person that we celebrate here was a slave? But there were 9 free people on that battlefield during the same damn day. We don't celebrate the Black people that were already here. The first Queen of America was a Black woman, an English queen. There were 2 of them. We don't talk about that. We don't even just put us back into history where we were supposed to be, where we were. Who's the Black man that rode across the Delaware with George Washington? They took the Black people out on purpose to subrogate us so that you don't have anything of pride or anything to aspire to. They did it on purpose. That's the systemic stuff. That's the stuff that needs to go. That and half of the juvenile justice system.
Thank you, Jody. We have a question I have a question directly at you, Katie, and this is tricky. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to pass because this is heavy. How do you, as a biracial mom, talk to your kids about racism? So if you want to play pass the baton, we can see what we can come up with. But you're also welcome to pass because this is a pretty big panel and that's a pretty heavy conversation.
So my internet seems a little unstable. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. That is a huge question, and I don't want to pass, but I also want to say I don't think I can answer it very well in this setting. I will just say that, as I think it was Jody who said, when your eyes are open, you're going to see some stuff and you got to see it and not look away. And that's what my family does. I'm the only white person in my family. And so we see things often differently and see them a lot because things happen to my family, but also because I have learned that history and I've trained myself to see these things. And so we see things a lot and we talk about them when they come up. We teach my Black boys what to watch out for because that's important. I want my kids to be safe, like everyone wants their kids to be safe. And so, when we notice things in the news, in a TV show or a movie, we're kind of like, did you see that? Let's talk about what that was there, right? So that they learn to recognize it. And, my 14-year-old and my 19-year-old watched the movie with us. And even the 14-year-old, things were happening in that movie. And he was like, really? she said that, or he did that, and, oh, they didn't see that, like when the parents sometimes responded surprised and not having a deeper understanding of this stuff. My 14-year-old knew this stuff, but it's because we talk about it. Right. And so that's just me going back to that. So I'm sorry I can't answer it fully because it's a deep question. It's not a quick thing, but train yourself to see it. Practice talking about things, like I said earlier, with someone you trust so that it flows more easily. And then you just, ask the kid, what did you notice? What did you think? Because I think Mona said too, like when someone tells you your story, tells you their story, listen and believe them. And so just, I would just listen to my kids. And I have to admit that there are times that my kids have now told me that they would tell me stuff and they felt I didn't hear them. And that hurts. And I think I, as a mom, wanted to keep them safe and protect them. And so when they were younger, I think I sometimes found other ways to kind of explain things away. And that was not the right way to handle that. So I saw that, and I know the person who asked this question has people in her family that identify as biracial, so she wants to know how to answer this. And so I would say don't dismiss. And like Mona said, if they tell you, believe them, and talk.
Dan, you have an addition.
A quick plug, a friend of mine, African-American man, Andrew Grant Thomas, who has worked closely with John Powell and others at the Kerwin, when he was at the Kerwin Institute. He started an organization with his wife who's biracial, and it's called Embrace Race, and it's all about raising kids in a multiracial family. So
thank you.
Embrace Race.
That's awesome. Thank you. Go ahead, Jody. I'm sorry, Mona.
Plug something that Dan mentioned earlier, that implicit bias test. I'm not saying it's everything, but I think that's one of those easy, low-hanging fruit things that you should start. And in the spirit of disclosure and honesty, Dan, I took the test, a woman of color, and I slightly favored white people. So that was really scary. At first, it was incredibly scary for me, because does that mean I hate myself? Does that mean I'm a racist? But then as I thought about it and processed it with a few trusted friends, I realized that, I'm in America. I consume the media. I'm born and brought up here. This is my life. So I wanted to say that and share that with everybody. So you're not afraid when you take that test. Don't be afraid of the results. Just say, now I know. So now that I know that that's my, that was a couple of years ago, but I'm assuming I'm not so evolved 2 years later. So now that I know that I'm that person, I try to check myself.
Thanks, Mona. Jody, you have a quick comment.
I did. I brought it up earlier today, so I'm just going to go over these because that person asked what they can do, right? And there are 3 questions you can ask yourself that we had here. You can ask yourself one thing that you yourself, have not been doing that you can start doing to interrupt patterns of racism is, and then you answer that for yourself. And then the other one is to stop doing something. So one thing that would be you, can be that have been doing to stop, that you're going to stop doing that influences systemic racism. And then find one thing that you've been doing to interrupt, that can interrupt patterns of racism that you will continue to do. And if you can ask yourself those questions and start there, you'll at least, because everybody is, like you said, everybody's on a different spectrum. Everybody's someplace different. So some people can read a book and learn a lot and grow from it. Some people, are going to have to get deeper than that, or have already done that and are ready to move further than that. So it's a personal journey, and everybody has to do the personal work. It's not easy. What is it, Mona? You said it's like being a drug addict. You have to work at it every day. You have to get up every day and decide, I'm not going to be racist today. We're trying not to say something too stupid today.
Thank you.
Can I just give a 30-second overview too of you know what folks can do, especially from the school's perspective. To echo what Jody's saying, do your work. You know, white folks like unlearn the stuff that we were taught when we all were young, right? People of color, white folks, we were all taught the same bad information, same misinformation. And then talk to your kids, talk to your friends, talk to your family. Most importantly, the parents, talk to your kids. You know, we have an opportunity to really shift how future generations think about this. And I'm already seeing the effects of that with young people. And we're seeing that across the country, I think. And then in terms of the schools, like partner with us. You know, I think it's hold us accountable and do it in a partnering way. I mean, I was definitely one of the masses before I became an educator where I thought like, oh, I know how to do that job. I sat through it for 13 years. And unfortunately, there's a lot more that goes into it. And Lexington, I will attest, is doing so much more than in any other district that I have worked with. And Katie and I just taught a class for administrators with probably 8 or 9 different districts from the area. And they were amazed at the things we were doing. And we recognize it's not enough. You know, go to our equity website on the district website where all the stats Stan's talking about, Jody's talking about. We're being really public with them because we want to partner with the community to make a difference and change them.
That's awesome. Thank you. Quick shout out to Superintendent Dr. Hackett. And Dan, you have something, then I'm going to wrap up with our last question and move to Christina for close.
So this comes up when I work with school districts quite frequently, as well as in research with researchers as well. There's an easy explanation that oftentimes is the one that people grab for, which is this is all about poverty. That's that's one of the most common ones. So I would say you need to reject the status quo and stop thinking that those are distinct things, that the patterns of poverty and class, we have a caste system in America, and these things are intertwined, and you really can't disentangle them if you understand the history. So avoid the easy explanations that allow you to say, well, it's not really racism, it's something else.
That is a perfect answer to the very last question, which is, can we rid Lexington of systemic racism without addressing the economic impact of racism on people of color? Economics in Lexington is used to discourage more Blacks from moving into Lexington. I think you kind of answered it.
No.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I think, and I live in a wealthy suburban town myself, and we have to really question, like, why do we live in these spaces? And it is part of the reason we moved to this space, because there are virtual gates on the community through the economics that kept people of color out. And if that is the case, we've got some real soul searching to do as a community. You know, I think we need to consider how are we opening up those gates. We look at we had our president put out a from my perspective, very problematic tweet the other day about affordable housing and equating affordable housing with people of color and poverty and crime. You know, if we're committed to these to dismantling the systems, we have to be okay with, you know, affordable housing going up across the street from our home. And I know from my own community, people fight tooth and nail against that, at the same time that they've got Black Lives Matter signs in their front yard.
Yeah.
I have to say, yes, the affordable housing has a big part to do with it, but also like coming from Andover and going to an all-Black church that people travel all over the place from New England to go to. I'd have to say that the people that have real money that are Black, they might not want to come to this town. It's not one of the most friendly, it's not known to be one of the most friendly towns. And there are Black people that live in this town that are sending their kids to other private schools because they know that it's not a friendly place. That's why Black people don't move here. They're in Beverly, they're in Randolph, they're in other towns. West Medford used to be an all affluent Black community back in the day when I was growing up. They're just not here. And it's not just because, it's because of the environment that lies here.
Okay. I want to apologize to everyone whose question or comment that we did not get to. I'm really sorry. I did jump around. I tried to get a diverse group of questions. Johnny and Dan, I do want to say there was a student that mentioned that they were discouraged, and Jody, because the student mentioned your name and specifically specifically. They were discouraged from AP classes because of the other classes that they were taking, and that they felt that they weren't not getting AP opportunities at the high school. I'm just going to leave that one. And I'm also going to say that
prerequisites.
Yeah, discouraged by their guidance counselor. So, I mean,
everyone has.
Yep. And there's also, we didn't talk much about it. It comes up very briefly in the film, but there are also Indigenous peoples that have very similar treatment as Blacks and Hispanics in this country. And if we do the Black and brown skin, they fall under and fall into these categories often. And we didn't really get to that, and I want to apologize for that. But I think that if someone wants to add that, I think they definitely feel covered in this, or should be covered and included in this group. Definitely disadvantaged and marginalized in many of the same ways. Is there anybody else who wanted to finish up, or I'm going to move to Christina, to do her next wrap up with a quick close from Tony Serio. Are we good? All right, Christina, you're in.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for staying through. I'm really glad this is recorded, because I know I'm going to be going back and watching it over and over and taking notes, because there's so much information that I need to unpack, really. So thank you, everyone, again. So I mentioned at the beginning, the surprise is that Corin Stenbridge and the Cary Library Foundation have underwritten the purchase of the American Dream game. So that is the game the students play, the tabletop game. And so they have paid for purchase the games so that they will be available at the library as well as at the schools and at the community center. And I think it's going to, so, that's another great way for anyone who's out there. I'm sure there will be a way that the game can be accessed, but play the game. It's a great way to have these conversations, so that you're not like trying to sit there quietly trying to figure out what to say, but a great way to see, how different, what different experiences are. So that's one. The other one is, I know some people either, didn't get a chance to finish the movie or missed the window, or I want to watch it again. There is, Christine had put it in the chat that there's a link you can go to, this Eventbrite link, and the filmmakers at Point Made Learning, they're doing a webinar for where you can find out what happens to Martha and Terrence are coming back. And let me see here. Can you see this? All right, so Martha and Terrence, they're going to have a little reunion with Liza Toulousan, who she was the facilitator. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's on August 11th, but included in that link, you should be able to access the movie. It's for a fee, but it's a pretty reasonable price overall.
Christina, can you tell everybody how to get the link from LexMedia to rewatch if they want to watch the tape? Do you know how to do that? Do we have that yet? Or can we say, Christine? Yes, thank you, Christine.
I noted in the chat that I will get the link from LexMedia when the video is ready, and I'll share it with everybody who registered for the event tonight.
That's awesome. Also, I'm totally remiss. I did not say thank you. Thank you to our panelists so much. I really, really appreciate all of your warmth and kindness and telling of your personal stories. That's not always easy. And thank you to everyone who showed up tonight to listen and to hear everybody's thoughts and talk about the movie.
Okay, so just the other thing is starting, let's see, today's Tuesday. Okay, so on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this week, we are running small group discussions. So please consider signing up for one of those. I think Thursday is pretty full, but Friday and Saturday, we have a good number of openings. So those are Friday evening, Thursday and Friday, the small group discussions are from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And Saturday, it's from 10:30 to 12 p.m. So, okay, I wrote this. I have to read this part so that I can't make it. And if those times do not work for you, we also have a future discussion opportunity that you can sign up for and let us know. So that way we know who to reach out to as we plan future opportunities to have these discussions. And one of the reasons we wanted to do that is also, these conversations often are just so condensed, and we want to make sure that anyone who wants to, ask questions or, have more of a sense of closure can have the time and space for that. So please consider signing up for, you can come both Friday and Saturday if you want. So there's that. And the last thing is, the license that the high school and middle school PTOs arranged, we are allowed, I believe, 2 virtual viewing periods. So we will be working on bringing this back again. And I encourage you to participate the second time around. I know I've used this movie almost as a measuring stick for myself. There were so many scenes that didn't really quite make sense to me the first time around, and like a year later, it's made more sense. And then another 6 months later, I'm like, oh, I finally understand this. So, it's not going to be, you won't be watching and being like, oh, I've done this and seen that. Yeah. Thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight. And I'm going to just pass it to Tony.
Everyone, thanks again, Tanya and Christina and everyone that was involved with the panel discussion. I thought it was wonderful, as well as presenting the movie. Quick plug for Sharon Gunda and myself as the members of the Human Service Department for the town of Lexington. I just wanted to mention that Sharon has been running a support group for both Black and Hispanic students, ages 12 through 18. I believe there's 3 sessions left. It'll end in August 24th, but they're Mondays at 1 p.m. So if you're a student and you see this and are interested, please email Sharon at sgunda, so SGUNDA, at lexingtonma.gov. I also wanted to mention I'm looking forward to connecting with Carey Memorial Library this fall so that we can continue the teen drop-in group that I had going last year and the year before. And thinking, as we've been doing this film and learning a lot about the American Dream game, potentially setting up some sort of virtual format and hopefully getting that together sometime in the fall when we get with the game and I'm able to talk with the library. So thank you all again for having us. And if you want to get in contact with Human Services, I'll put the contact information in the chat line. So thanks again.
Oh, and Katie, did you have information for this?
Dismantling racism.
Christine put a link in there, so if anyone is looking for what to do next or to learn more about systemic racism and how it operates in Lexington specifically, the Dismantling Racism course will run this fall, Monday evenings. We have a lot of spots. Friday mornings, we have just a few spots left. So Christine did put a link in the chat. And I think that's it. Thank you.
All right.
So on behalf of the library, I want to add my thanks to everyone else. Thanks to all of the panelists and to Christina for coordinating with me, and also to everybody who did come in today. I think this is a really active discussion, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to everyone's questions or comments. You will be getting an email from me probably tomorrow with a survey asking your thoughts about this kind of program and what other sorts of programs you'd like to see. Some of the resources that were posted in chat will also be in that email. So you'll see a link to sign up for the small group discussions. I'll put in some of the email addresses that were shared in the chat. I'll put in the link to the course Katie was just talking about. So watch for that email and some additional resources. LexMedia does a really nice job finishing up their videos. They do some post-production work that makes them look really fantastic. So that video will not be available immediately, but as soon as I have a link, I will share a second email with the link to the video, and you can share that with anybody, whether they registered for this or not. Anybody can watch that. It will be on LexMedia's on-demand schedule, as well as the YouTube channels of LexMedia and the library. And I'll put all of that in an email to you all, so you don't have to remember anything. And if that's it, Christina, do you want me to just roll the credits?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you again to everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.